You know, when I put this series together, when I put this series of unfinished ships together, I thought, oh, Alex, you've got to avoid some of your basically old staples. And when I say old staple, I mean things I've talked about a lot of. And then I thought, well, actually, no, you don't, because they've all been talked about in context of various things. And also, there is something nice about going back to topics when you've had more time to think about it, and you've been after you've done a video and doing a new video, and you sort of not trying to redo the old video, but doing a new video on it a few months, year or so later, and seeing how the ideas have percolated in your mind since. There is something nice about it. There's also something refreshing about it. It allows you to think things through. So, G3 and N3 classes. Come on, these are ships which have never been built, and I started off with the Graf Zeppelin. So, yeah. Shames Book Pug! Yay! I'm a historian, and I like being a naval historian, and one of the things that there is about being a naval historian is you don't get paid just for being a naval historian. You don't. In a nicer way, I'm not sure that some people do still have the idea that academics just get paid for being an academic, and some people have this view, and maybe there is a topic out there, I've never found it, that does, and some people have this view that you can just get money chucked to you. You don't. And part of making naval history pay so you can keep doing what you love is selling your product. That includes this book. That includes my Spreadshirt store down below. That includes the people who are patrons and the people who have joined this channel and who subscribe and the people who watch the videos and see the adverts, all these things. All of you are contributing to making this a viable occupation. Something that I can pay, well, at least pays for itself, if not quite paying for me to live. So thank you. And I'd also add, of course, there's shipshape.org, which we're currently fundraising on for our trip to Australia, and a link to that is down below as well, when this video comes out. So yes, I have done other videos on the G3 and N3, but I want you to think about it's not just them. They're kind of symptomatic of an entire generation of lost capital ships. Let me put it this way. We have capital ships which were completed during World War One. I'd argue Hood was included in that number. I.e. both battlecruisers and battleships which are finished in that sort of period. We have capital ships which are created under the treaty, including the first branch of them, which of course are Nelson and Rodney. We have, prior to World War One, we have, I would argue, roughly 3 generations of capital ship. You have the Dreadnought generation, you have the Orion generation, and then you have the Queen Elizabeth generation. And I know the Orions are officially called Super Dreadnoughts when they're first launched, but then the Queen Elizabeths are called Super Dreadnoughts, so it just gets confusing as to which generation they're in, but there are roughly 3 generations. But the generation we don't have an example of, the post-World War One pre-treaty ships, we have none of that generation. We have no idea what those ships, produced without compromise forced by treaty, would have been capable of. We have no idea what value they would have brought to the world. We can only theorize, we can postulate. And they're absolutely gorgeous looking ships. Okay, yes, I am no fan of that third turret. I really am not. At best, I consider it a vestigial design, as they slowly work from their ideal design of having 2 turrets each end, and then slowly, shrinking it down and going, well, let's reorientate to make the ship and hull more efficient to maximize, because there is still a compromise going on. So the compromise is infrastructure. They want to build this generation without without upgrading all the world's infrastructure and all the Navy's infrastructure. At this point, that's one of the things the Royal Navy is doing. They've built hoods, and they almost built hoods based on the idea of this is the maximum we can build, and theoretically we've got some infrastructure that can support this. And then when it comes to the G3 and N3, they're going, hang on, we need to actually have infrastructure that can support this. So are we going to get the money to build some immediately after the war's over? Nope. So it has to use existing infrastructure. So that's our limitation. And that's what causes the sort of the shrinking and the guns to be moved in. And I always consider it a sort of interesting idea that as you go further on, that turret goes further. And by the time you get to some of the later designs, and these are the designs, I mean, after they've finalised on the G3 and officially done the ordering, to an extent, they start pushing forward, and that turret starts to move forward. And you end up, in Nelson and Rodney, of course, it ends up being all 3 forward with B turret raised. But for a large number of designs, it's C turret raised, and putting all the guns forward. So why isn't the gun forward in this scenario? Well, there are 2 reasons it's often done on the G3 and the N3, and this is the N3 design, which was of course going to have 18-inch guns. So frankly, anything getting close enough that it not being able to fire directly backwards is a problem with its 18-inch guns is a lot of things have gone wrong scenario. But I still don't like it. And I will explain why. And the engineers at the time didn't like it as well for similar reasons. You see, the superstructure and the space below it provides a natural break between the engines, all the settings for them, and the magazines. And the magazines are going to have to connect up into that space because they're going to have to connect up with that aft turret. And if you take a good look at the design, you see that the turbine rooms, i.e. not the boiler rooms, the turbine and gearing rooms have been placed forward so that you are keeping as much of that heat away from those magazines as possible. Why? Because heating up ammunition and powder is not good. Not good for efficiency. But it was felt also breaking it up provided a better fire control solution at certain points. And yes, they changed their mind as the technology for fire control evolved, and it did improve over the period after World War I quite quickly, as a lot of those people who've been in the fleet, whose value had been having them in the fleet, using their knowledge and experience to give you the best, most viable capital ships, came back and entered the constructor's offices, entered 3rd Sea Lord's office, entered various Admiralty staff positions, and started funneling in their ideas and giving all that information. Things started to improve dramatically. It's lots of little changes that things go up by. So there's a reason for it. But I don't like it because that gun doesn't really have, for me, a good range of fire. If you think about it, it can do, at best, probably about 110 degrees each side. Whereas the other 2 can both manage roughly 270 degrees an arcs of fire. And if you think about that gun as well, in peacetime it's going to have problems with exercising its guns because you are going to be constantly worried about superstructure. So in its peacetime firing regulations, I can see it not being able to fire, well, definitely not as far forward as it's positioned. Although, to an extent, the blast wouldn't affect that superstructure because of where the guns are. But I wouldn't be surprised if it had almost a there-to-there maybe a 90-degree arc, or maybe even as little as an 80-degree arc, they're allowed to practice in peacetime for just don't want the extra damage. I'm also not too keen, to an extent, on some of the layout of the secondaries, but we'll leave that to one side. It's a nice ship. It's a bit slow for my liking, but it's a nice ship. And if it had been built, and let's say a treaty system hadn't come into place till about 1930, the treaties would have had to be very, very different if this thing had been going around. Honestly, if this thing with its 18-inch guns had come out, I'm fairly certain there are large portions of the US Navy which would have gone, oh great, that's our entire fleet gone. To be fair, a fair number of them would probably say the same thing about this particular beast. 16.5-inch guns. Don't sound like much of an improvement over 16-inch guns, do they? But they are enough in the damaging world, and combined with its speed, if the USN is ready to rate Hood as equivalent to one of their 16-inch battleships, this thing is going to dominate them. Dominate those battleships, at least in their thinking. It is absolutely amazing in that regard. It is a battle cruiser, and it is top speed, and it's important, is 30 knots. And it is 46,000 tons, 46,500 tons, 160,000 shaft horsepower, 33 knots top speed, I think. Let me just clarify. 32 knots, 33 knots. Various people putting through different mathematical figures working out on it. You have to remember that the Royal Navy is a navy which has a habit of finding out its ships are faster than it thought they were going to be. It happened with the Ark Royal officially. There's the official figure for the Ark Royal, and then there's its actual, its design top speed, and its official top speed, which was faster than that, and we can all be fairly certain both are lies. In that it was probably designed for a little bit faster, and if they've had to raise its official top speed, that probably tells us it's even a lot more faster if it wanted to be, and that was HMS Ark Royal prior to World War II. And the same with Illustrious class, and of course there's Nelson and Rodney, which regularly seem to find a way to, despite the fact there are only two shaft designs, find some extra knots from somewhere and cause various panics to go amongst various enemy ships who are going, "There, you're not supposed to be so fast!" So, what I would say is 32, 33 knots, we can all believe that when we see it. 7,000 nautical miles at 16 knots is a fairly decent thing as well. The fact is, with 8 twin 6-inch guns and 16-inch or 16.5-inch, there are again debates on the various things of what they're going to be fitted with. They would not have been nice things for anyone to fight. They would have caused a lot of upset. Not, and I would say this, not because they are particularly, how do I put this, particularly revolutionary. They really aren't. It's another Warrior Dreadnought moment. It's going to be considered revolutionary because of all the technology it's bringing together. But honestly, it's not that revolutionary. What it is, especially with its anti-torpedo systems and various other protections, what it is concentrated capability. And it's all those things wrapped up together in one bow working. And it's going to mean nations which are thinking about fighting Britain are going to have to think, well, hang on. What do we have that can catch this thing and possibly kill it? Now, this is helpfully, someone did some designs for me of various variations of the G3 a few years ago, and well, not necessarily a few years ago, a few years ago, yes, but also more recently, a few sort of months ago, I think. These ones came in, this particular one, and you know they produced different options of including them in a nail rod form. I'd say an F3 form where they would have had where C turret would have been raised up rather than B turret would make more sense for a G3 design. But that's mainly because of balancing all the extra weight and wanting to try and limit some of the weight forward. Because remember, if you raise up a turret like you do in this scenario, and you're also having the length of expanse of a hull, you are balancing weights. You are balancing things around your hull to, because remember, your center of mass in a ship is not just on the height level, but it's also lengthwise, and it's going to affect the movement of the hull through the waters. So I have a feeling for a ship that size, they'd have gone with a raised sea turret position. But that would have meant a turret would have been able to do pretty much a 360 turnaround. B turret would be 270 degrees of arc, and so would C turret have been 270 degrees of arc. Under this scenario, A and C are 270 degrees. B turret is the 360. Again, there are advantages to that, especially if you sort of look aft and you're sort of thinking of, well, they've got things aft which, you know, you might want to avoid, but there again, let's be honest, you still can't fire 360. You might be able to move and twist around 360, but you can't fire 360. In reality, what is the all-forward arrangement? It's an admitting that things like Jutland aren't going to happen again. Because if they do, okay, you've got the firepower, you can do it. But honestly, this is far more useful for doing things like the engagement between Bismarck and Rodney and King George V, or the various other engagements you have, which are a couple of ships on a couple of ships in World War II. That's where the all-forward arrangement and this position of guns really helps, because it's when you can manoeuvre. It's when you can use that firepower. So we've got a traditional G3 design, and we've got what could have been a modified G3 design. To my mind, the modified G3 is actually more likely to have been produced. I think you could have taken the same hull and easily produced it to that design, or a variation of that design, and I think they would have done, because it allows you to have a slightly larger superstructure, which is helpful for various things. It also allows you to have even more space, and even more, therefore, resilience between your engines and heat sources and your magazines, which makes it an even more viable vessel for going around the world. It also gives you another option if you do it that way, because the more space you have between the guns and the rest of the ship is the more you can start treating things as sectional. So you don't need to do anything. You can ignore the guns completely and the gun systems completely almost while you're doing engine work down the back. There is an advantage to this layout from the maintenance perspective. You have to be far less likely to get involved with other things you don't need to. And if you consider the secondary arrangement, yeah, you can do a lot of work on these. I do believe both of these vessels have been, to an extent, modernised. So, 4th of May. This comes out on the 3rd of May, so that'll be tomorrow. Ooh. 4th of May, Battle of Hakodate. Well, I hope you enjoy it when it comes out, and I hope you find it interesting. We are really building up, and we'll be able to make probably announcements soon when this comes out about ship shape and about what it's going to be able to be doing. Because it's going to depend really on how much funding we've got in by this week. Because we need to start booking. We need to start booking stuff. A couple have managed to book stuff because they've got the money on side, but the ones who haven't got money on side need to start booking things as well. And yeah, this is the start of today's topic question, really. And also, I was using the sort of announcements to thread out people, because if people have turned off, then they're going to miss the question. So if you now make comments about the question, those people are going, "Well, you didn't say a question." Well, it's after. It's after. The scariest option considered, better even than the Superhood, aka J3. Yes, this is the battle cruiser. Of sorts. With 9 18-inch guns. I really, really do like the K3 design. And personally, I hold a very firm belief, if it had been completed, and there had been vessels like this in service in the periods of of World War II, etc., we would have had some very interesting actions result. Because something which can go as fast as this can, with 9 18-inch guns, is going to change the world. But it's also, to an extent, a realization of the point of once you get to a certain amount of firepower, what are you armouring against? Because once you've got 9 18-inch guns, armouring against 18-inch guns is difficult. You basically need to do angled internal belts, and that's why you have the belt 305mm at 25 degrees. You have 16 6-inch guns. I always think it's interesting the sheer volume of 6-inch guns put into these designs. And you sit there and go, it really does show, to an extent, what they were being built for within mind. Because, yeah, they're carrying 6 4.7-inch guns for their AA defense. And they're carrying some nice large torpedo tubes. But if you've got a load of 6-inch guns, those can be absolutely murder against enemy cruisers. They can be, of course, in this period. But more importantly, they're going to absolutely massacre merchant ships if you need them to. And it's almost a realization, it's almost getting back to a sort of pre-Dreadnought philosophy in that I've got my really big guns for if I have to fight something really big and worthwhile, but otherwise I'm holding on to those shells and those weapons. So I've got these secondaries. And these secondaries are other ships in the world's primaries, because they will basically kill anything below, equivalent to that ship or below. So I don't really have to turn on my primary weapons for anything less than a heavy cruiser. In fact, the odds are I won't. And odds are I can outrun pretty much anything I want to. And thank you to Magic, by the way. I find his images all over the place. So I would love to have contact details, because I would love to discuss some designs with him and some of the stuff I've picked up at various points, including some of the stuff I'd love to have him, because he does these beautiful detailed drawings, and if I could get an arrangement working with him to get him to do some of the potentials of the Admiral class conversions, I'd find it probably really useful for some of the stuff I do on my channel. And some of the older ship designs from World War One, 1905, 1908 era, where we don't really have good drawings surviving of those ships, and a good detailed drawing is really good. Anyway, to today's question. This is the scariest option as far as I'm concerned, the K3. 9 18-inch guns, 16 6-inch guns, 6 4.7-inch guns, 2 torpedo tubes, and enough speed, range, and therefore enough speed, range, and armor and firepower to make anyone's day really, really bad. I mean, one of these enters in the water, US Navy's going, Congress, yeah, we're gonna have to scrap about half our fleet. Why? Because we just need to, because there's no point. There's just no point. It has no value. It has no meaning anymore. Can't use it for second line duties. We could, but are you prepared to pay for us to also accrue a fleet which is big enough to do the primary duties as well as that? Nope. Then you know what's happening. But isn't it good enough for dealing with the Japanese? Yes, it's fine for dealing with the Japanese, but the Royal Navy have just built something which has this many 18-inch guns on. Do you imagine what the Japanese are going to build next? Oh, of course, yes, okay. I forgot. The Japanese are size obsessed. So, I have two questions. I have A. The Royal Navy decides on the K3 instead of the G3. And because they decide earlier, they cancel the Admirals earlier, because K they get to before the G. And because they get to it earlier, they order it, and 2 of them actually get built before the 1920 treaty. So the Royal Navy now has 2 K3s in service, Hood in service, Renown, Repulse, all the other vessels. I'd love to hear what you think would happen. A, to the 2 remaining K3 hulls, what they would do with them. Would they become their Royal Navy's equivalent of Lexington and Saratoga? And secondly, what do you think the other navies would have built on them? Built in comparison. And thirdly, I want to hear what you think is the scariest prospect for any of the navies being built in this period, if they'd actually built it. And, you know, for the Italian Navy, and it's coming up in this series, the Francisco Caracolla. Honestly, if that vessel had been built, good luck getting through the treaty system any time, as quickly as it is, because if the Royal Navy and the French Navy have got to deal with that in the Mediterranean, then they are going to want to upgrade ships quickly. Because that thing would have been a beast in the Mediterranean. And if you're building from that, then goodness knows what happens to the Littorios. Because if that's your baseline, and you're making your Littorio of metal, Littorios were good enough as they were. Imagine the beast they'd be if the Francisco Caracolla had been around. So I want to hear what you think of, I suppose it's 3 questions. And I'll go through them again. Question 1. What do you think of is the scariest project which wasn't completed in your mind in this period of the post-World War One design generation of capital ships? That's battleships and battlecruisers. Question 2. 2 of these K3s get built. What happens to the treaty system? I'd love to hear what you think. And question 3. 2 of these K3s get built. What did the US Navy and Imperial Japanese Navy do in response? And let's be honest, 9 18-inch guns. Yamato has arrived many, many years early in terms of firepower. Not in terms of armor, but in terms of firepower. It's a good looking ship. Thank you for watching, and hope you enjoyed, and yeah. This is part of the Year of Technology's Key Ships series.